I just read something where it's like, oh, you can dispose of software. Now you have the capability where, like, if you don't like the software, just dispose it and rebuild it again. Do you understand the tokens associated with that? Do you understand it's not just code? It is business processes. It is change management with the underlying user. Don't be so cavalier about just throwing away a piece of software because you don't like it. My name is Ernest Ng. I'm a senior principal of AI strategy at Workday.
Ernest, it's good to see you.
Hey, Ryan.
It's been a while since we've worked together formally, so this is really fun to me. Why don't you give your background and what you're doing now, and then I'll kind of share the story of how you and I met a number of years ago on this journey.
Yeah, so my background currently, I'm at Workday, and I am part of a team that is really thinking about transforming AI go-to-market. And so we're working with a lot of our largest customers to really help them understand how best to adopt AI, utilize Workday for that purpose, and then also really just transform their organization and reap the rewards and get the gains from AI. Before Workday, I was at a company, a startup called HiredScore. We were one of the first companies, I would say, to do AI for HR. And we were acquired by Workday about 2 years ago. And then before that, I was at Salesforce for almost 12 years, running HR strategy, people analytics, HR data science, data engineering, and workforce planning. Ultimately, my background, I'm an experimental psychologist by training. I studied IO psychology and developmental psychology from a cognitive psychology background, which is why I'm really fascinated by AI, because basically everything that we're trying to do is what I studied when trying to understand how humans develop.
I think my goal for the podcast maybe just shifted from like the boring practical business stuff into the more like bigger picture questions. I didn't know that your background was in psychology. Let me pick up our story together at Salesforce. So you were leading people analytics. I was at a company called Narrative Science, which was kind of the very first rudimentary, if you will, like language model platform. But what I find fascinating is people like you picked up on what narrative science was doing, and the use cases you came to us for were basically ChatGPT. You were asking us for ChatGPT. We didn't have it, but that's what you wanted. There's a small number of people in the market today where they didn't just wake up in 2022 and realize like what was possible. Like this was 2018, 2019. Can you just talk to me about like, go put yourself in a time capsule. Back then, what was the problem you were trying to solve then? And then kind of map that back to like, is this exactly what you thought was going to happen?
Yeah, I think the problem that I was trying to solve just from a people analytics perspective was you have a lot of data within an organization, and especially people data. And you try and build these dashboards, you try and build these, reports and all this stuff for people to consume the data, to try and drive data-driven decision making. Dashboards are great. They're beautiful. They can display this data. They can do all of this. But if you are not really a data analyst and you're not designing these interfaces for the common user that you were trying to get to uptake this data and utilize this data, they're just not going to use it because it's not mandatory to use a lot of the times. They actually want to either read something really quickly that tells them everything that they need to know and then move on, or they want it, somebody to have that interpretation and then just coach them along with them, right? Now, when you think about traditionally the HR function, they're not data analysts, right? And so now you're talking to people who are like not data analysts, who don't really dive in the data or any type of data really, on a regular basis, trying to understand the data to then help their business leader interpret that data as well. So like you get into this telephone issue of like interpretation of data, and it just sort of shrinks down to the least common denominator, and then you're not really making great informed decisions, right? So what we were trying to do is like let's figure out a way to turn the data that is into the dashboard into text that someone can just read. And that's why we turn to narrative science.
Do you think that the problem that you just described with Claude, ChatGPT, whatever kind of layer you want to think of, is this now a solved problem, or is there still bottlenecks, or is there still room to grow to get there? Because it just feels like the capabilities are probably there, but I'm still not seeing a lot of adoption of what you're describing.
The basic capabilities are there. So if you just think about, can you give it a table of here's your head count, here's your attrition rate, here's your name your sort of people metric or name your business metric. It'll reflect back, what's in there in a coherent fashion of some sort, right? But I think the hard part right now is proprietary business processes. Every company might have a different way to talk about stage one or stage two or stage three of their pipeline, right? Where the two things are starting to come together is how you take these large generalistic models and the proprietary business logic within either your CRM, your HCM, all of these other systems, and then have it come together so that it's pertinent to you, right? And it's not just generalized stuff. It's got to know your documents. It's got to know, your proprietary business logic. It's got to know your policies and other things like that so that it, gives you really personalized, insights that are aligned to how your organization is going to operate, right? I think it's just starting because in large enterprises, connecting all of those systems together with different security models and all that kind of stuff can lead to some complications.
Let's think more about the mid-market though, where if you're not overly married to your tech stack, or you're not fully ingrained with any one of those tools that you described, it just feels like relatively quickly a company could kind of turn itself on its head with a lot of this stuff, as long as the company's not beholden to a lot of the enterprise kind of organizational blockers. Do you agree with that?
I think for organizations that have less constraints, yeah, the technology is there. I think what is still potentially a challenge is the smart design of what you're trying to do and the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and how you can make sure that, you get a predictable outcome consistently. The reason you organize people together into an organization to accomplish the goal of an organization is so that, like, you have some consistency, you have some ability to have some predictability in terms of your business cadence and your processes and your things like that, that the rest of the company also knows. And so, like, how you smartly design how each person in that organization uses these tools and how they can predict other people's behavior so that they can, row in one direction is still going to be a challenge. It's not a technology challenge. It is a people organization challenge.
We've experienced that in our company. We're tiny, and the way that I use Cowork is very specific to the way my brain works. And then the way our CTO works, he uses OpenClaw and he uses Cowork and Cloud Code. And, my guess is we're each kind of like spinning off into a different direction of how we are designing the system of our company. But to your point, there's no one kind of thinking about, well, how does this tie together towards a consistent customer experience? I'm seeing a lot of businesses where they're doing two things. They're trying to set this grand AI strategy, and they're doing that without a lot of work on the ground to actually test and experiment and hypothesize. It's very much a theoretical design. But then on the same company, there'll be people who are just like sprinting ahead in their own work. And right now it's very, relatively speaking, inexpensive to do both of those things. On some level, like the cheapest it's ever going to be to try and figure some of this out, because the model companies, they're just trying to gain market share. And so they're trying to just get as many people into these tools as possible. In the future, it might be much more expensive to get the latest model. A lot of this testing and figuring it out is going to be hard because it's going to be expensive. You'll have to do a lot of pre-planning. Kind of walk me through, in your opinion, how do you see this playing out, the arc of time with companies that are either way ahead of this or the ones that are kind of just like, we're doing nothing and we're just going to see everybody else and we'll follow them in the future?
There's an interesting middle ground that I think most organizations need to think about. The companies that, are sprinting ahead, they're going to know sort of how to think about post AI business processes and all of these things, and what the AI can do, what the AI is okay at doing, and what you don't want the AI to do, right? That's an important thing to do, because ultimately AI is going to help democratize intelligence for a lot of organizations. And so being able to transform your business process and understand where, as a company, you feel comfortable is going to be a critical skill, right? Because you're going to be able to both take out costs, or reduce burdensome, bureaucracy. You're going to be able to do a lot of that kind of stuff like really quickly as these models evolve, right? You're going to have to be agile as the models get better to see how you can reap the rewards of that greater intelligence. And that skill is something that you need to develop now. And if you're not doing it, to imagine your organization to be able to quickly pivot and change 2 years from now or 3 years from now when the technology is even more amazing, I think you're fooling yourself. But another thing to think about as well is, just like the technology and these models are like the dumbest they're going to be right now, they're also the cheapest that they're going to be right now. The assumption that the price of compute, the price of tokens, and the price of inference is going to drop to near zero, I think is also a pipe dream.
Let's break that apart for a second, because it does feel like we're living in this microeconomy, the AI economy of the model costs this, the inference costs this, it costs this much to train it. It's not based on true market forces. These are heavily VC-backed companies, and Anthropic might be profitable soon, but OpenAI is nowhere near profitability. And so I think what you're saying is the demand for this capability is on an exponential. It's getting higher and higher and higher, but there's very, very real bottlenecks coming around. There's only so many data centers. The energy to power those costs money, and we don't have any other place to pull energy from unless we spend a lot of time and money building out that. It feels good now, but the model companies are more or less losing money on every interaction just to grab market share. But at some point, the bill is going to come, and so they're going to pass it on to the user. Is that kind of the arc of the argument?
I mean, that's the arc of every business. Business 101 is, you get them sort of hooked in a way and embedded in your organization, and then you figure out ways to get more revenue out of them. I don't imagine these things getting cheaper, right? Once you're embedded in an organization. And yes, Anthropic might be profitable or near profitability soon, but that's also because it's really focused on coding in certain of these enterprise use cases. You haven't seen Claude Cowork go into everybody gets a Claude Cowork in an organization. Now, what's the price of that compute as it adds up? And then are organizations willing to pay for something like that in the same way that they're willing to pay for, Claude Code, where, it actually has, value to a developer community, right?
I think from a CEO, CIO, CTO perspective, this is really important because coding has taken off. But Claude Code, for example, it's not you pay $100 a month and that's the cost of Claude Code. There is a cash register attached to that with tokens. It's a very lucrative business for Anthropic because companies are allowing engineers to do this because they think the benefit of the software and the solutions being created are worth the expense. But Cowork right now doesn't yet have a cash register natively attached to it. It's like $100 a month or whatever you're paying, and you kind of do whatever you want with it. But the average person is just scratching the surface. And so I think what you're saying is you start to get more and more people using it. At some point, those use cases like sales, finance, legal, HR, once those become like, oh, you can't do your job without Excel. It's like you can't do your job without a cowork. I think you're arguing that that cash register, of course, is going to be attached to your cowork license. And now you're a $100,000 a year employee. You might be spending $100,000 a year in compute. That decision at the CIO, CTO level, it doesn't exist right now because the model companies are more or less okay losing money on some users. They're making a lot of margin on others that aren't using it much at all. That's going to change.
Yeah, I think so. Tokens are a finite resource, right? They can be plentiful, but they're still finite in nature currently. And depending upon how many tokens your company is willing to purchase and how they distribute that, that's going to affect everything, right? You just have to think about all of the assumptions that some of these, fantastical futures are based upon, and just make sure that you're checking those assumptions. I just read something where it's like, oh, you can dispose of software. Now you have the capability where, like, if you don't like the software, just dispose it and rebuild it again. I'm like, do you understand the tokens associated with that? Do you understand it's not just code? It is business processes. It is change management with the underlying user. Don't be so cavalier about just throwing away a business, like a piece of software, because you don't like it. We're talking about time, energy, money, attention. Those are all finite resources. And just to be cavalier about, like, all of those things because now we have this super intelligence around, I still don't think that that's a valid assumption.
It feels like we've entered an age of abundance, but mainly because no one's charging us yet for a lot of the utilization of that abundance. So I think there is there's an HR and people side of this that I want to dive into, because not every use of a token is the same value. One person could use a token and create 10x kind of value of that one token's use. Another person might be suboptimally using that token and probably wasting money for the company or just no net benefit. When you have a company that's starting to adopt these things readily, and then there is this budgetary concern around who gets tokens and whatnot, it does seem to me that there's going to be a have and have nots at the employee level, where if you're trusted and you've proven to be really good at using tokens to be more productive for your company, and then somebody else isn't, how much patience is a company going to have to wait for the other people to catch up? Or at some point, I'm not advocating for this, I'm very concerned about this. It's, you look at somebody's salary and you're like, oh, okay, that's a line item, but then that person can't do that job unless they add on effective use of tokens, but they're just not the type of personality, willingness, whatever. So it's not about the line item expense of their salary. It's like the opportunity cost of giving them tokens, which they absolutely have to have for their job. It's not worth it for us. But then this other person is like flying with it. That really, really concerns me. And we talk to CHROs. We can't even begin to have this conversation because the mental model in the market doesn't exist. This is a future problem, but it's staring me in the face. Like, how do you feel about this sort of problem?
So I don't even think it's a future problem because I've seen this in the recruiting space, right? So like HiredScore built this AI agent for recruiting to help them screen resumes, resurface candidates from their database. And you see this difference in adoption from recruiters who are willing to do this and just how much more productive they could be, and then recruiters who aren't using it, aren't adopting it, don't want to change, and you can start to see the massive difference. And now the organization needs to make a decision. Basically, do I ratchet up the number of recs that every recruiter needs to have because I have this tool and I have these technologies in there? And the person who's using the tool the best, they're going to be able to keep up with that constant ratchet up of, instead of 7 hires per quarter, like you're at 70 hires per quarter. Like that's going to come really, really fast. And so, from a people perspective, you're really going to have to think about the goals that you measure people on. And then also, you're going to have to paint the picture of what the future is going to look like and what that transition is going to look like. And it's going to be for some of these, like, adopt or get off, right?
When I talk to people about this topic, I always come back to, have you seen the movie Elf? Will Ferrell, when he's Buddy the elf, and he's at the North Pole, and all the elves are making toys, and
Hmm.
the manager elf is going down the line, like, how many Etch a Sketches did you make? It's like 672 today, 495, and then Buddy is like 64, and like everybody else is like, good job, Buddy, you tried your best, but
Yeah.
like Buddy's a terrible elf now, and I think it's like it's a bad analogy, but I think that is a decent representation of what you're describing. One of the organizations that we work with has sprinted ahead on a lot of these functions, and they're relatively small, a couple hundred employees. The CEO every week counts literally every hour he works, and he's been doing this for years and years and years. So he has a very good understanding of his capacity constraints. And then he's also now tracking how much he gets done. And it's orders of magnitude more today than it was a year ago. And so, naturally, the thought process is, well, I now expect my employees to do the same thing. We've been working with some psychologists like you and people that are in professor roles at universities, and their data is very similar to ours, which is 75% of people right now are more or less passengers with AI. AI is kind of like happening to them. Something shows up, they'll use it, but like they're not really grabbing it and then redesigning their own work, their own career. 25% are drivers, and they're like, hold on, this new thing makes me this much better. So it's not a training disconnect. Even if you gave both populations the same training, that uptake is probably going to follow a very similar distribution. There is those people where all you have to do is light the fire. Their next step is they're going to use Claude to teach them. Like, they don't need training. They don't need any more training. They will just use the machine to teach them how to be better. And that distribution, it freaks me out, because I don't feel like I have the tools or the awareness of how to meet that 75% where they are to try and like pull them forward. I don't know what the answer is for that.
I mean, you have to think about most people work for a paycheck, right? That CEO example is great. That's his company. Like, that's all he thinks about, right? A lot of the times. Like, most people in that organization aren't as sort of, this is my life. And I think you're gonna find this is like the normal distribution, the normal worker, they're there for the paycheck. You're gonna hope that they work hard during 9 to 5, the hours that they're gonna be working. And once they clock out, they don't want to think about work. And they just want to come in and do their job the best that they can, be proud about it, but they're not like so wedded to their job as their identity that they're going to put in all of that work to do this, to do that, outside of the time. And if you're not freeing up space for them to do that within that 9 to 5, they're going to be like, not my responsibility, right? And as you ratchet up like the expectations of these things, they're going to feel like, oh, like the expectations have changed on me. And that also is not a great environment to work in. And then so now you're expecting the LLM or the AI to make up for that drop in discretionary effort. And like, you're not going to get the same output either, right? And so you're either going to have to think about post AI workflows and how things are done, and you're going to change the organizational processes because you have these tools that can do things autonomously. But if you're just thinking lifting and shifting my old workflow to now a LLM powered workflow, and my person is still doing the same thing, they're just doing it a little bit faster. We have this whole saying, what's going to happen? You're going to just have more happy dogs.
Say more about that.
they're just going to take that extra 30 minutes that they have and go walk their dog, right? Like, or they're going to go get a latte, or they're going to go to the break room and take a little break. And, you know, you're not going to reap the assumed rewards of that extra productivity. That's like 30 minutes of extra productivity a day. What are you going to do with that if you are just basically in a job for the paycheck?
So Ernest, I think I would love to tap into your background as a psychologist a little bit with the time we have left. We work with Harvard's AI Institute at the business school, and they talk about how their job is to run clinical trials on AI. Like, what's the right amount for a company? Where is it too much? Where is it too little? And on the individual level, what's that right dose? The Economist came out with an article about kind of the beauty of grunt work. It was about kind of the benefit of actually people doing the same repetitive tasks over and over and over again. And it taps into, you know, the way we think. We've got fast thinking, which is kind of like the part of our brain that is more on autopilot, and it just kind of does things regularly. And then you have slow thinking. And slow thinking is the deep thought. And with AI, the intensity of work can increase substantially, and it can really drain your brain very fast. And that repetitive, you know, subconscious type work, if we hand off a lot of that, what are we missing?
So my background is in psychology, the study of creativity and human motivation. And, you know, part of thinking about creativity and innovation is this: if you don't understand the domain that you're trying to be creative within very well, like, it's hard to be creative, because you could come up with something, but somebody else came up with this as well, and you don't know because you haven't studied it, you haven't understood it, you don't know all of the small details around it, and you can't find the gaps where something might be, and you can't really assess the quality of an idea unless you know you have some level of expertise. If you are not doing that grunt work and you're deferring that expertise to some type of other system, now you're deferring the judgment to that system as well. Where are you in that process? Where can you apply your creativity and what humans are good at and understanding those elements? I think IBM basically said, like, no, we're not going to not hire junior employees. We actually need those junior employees. We need them to do some of this work. And it's a business strategy that we hire them to do this work in order so that we can grow and be sustainable over the long course of time. You're going to need leaders to be agile, to have different experiences, to be able to build up that cognitive dexterity, right? If you're deferring all of that to an LLM, like, you're setting yourself up for, you know, what if the LLM goes down? When I was in HR, we had to do resilience planning. I think every organization has to do resilience planning. And so part of that process is like, what if the power goes out for 48 hours? How are you going to continue running your business, right? What if it goes out for a week? What if it goes, like, you need to find those things, or you need to build plans around that, especially now, like, we're in a very uncertain environment. And so if you build your organization on the assumption of certainty, right? Certainty of power, certainty of compute, certainty of, like, I mean, then you leave yourself open for a lot of potential uncertainty in this world.
I feel like we should schedule a follow-up, because this topic is a conversation all of itself. So Ernest, thank you so much for this. I know it takes you and I a while to get our kind of like engine going on these topics, but this was fascinating for me. Thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure.